All right. All right, Greer. It's great to have you on the episode today talking about heavy metal detox. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So this is a topic that I've never talked about on this episode, and I know it's incredibly important, and it seems like it's a huge focus of your work. So I figure we could just dive right in and start with why we even accumulate heavy metals in the body, and if this is foreign to some people, I think this will be an interesting concept for them.
Yeah. I love heavy metals. It kind of just something that happened, in my own family and our lifestyle. My son regressed into autism at around 19 months. I've been a registered dietitian for over 15 years, and watching my son regress and trying to figure out, kind of what happened, it was like a very big switch. One moment he was completely fine. And then the next moment, he completely stopped talking. He wouldn't even look at me. He would sit and bang his head against the wall. He would have GI issues. I mean, it was just a quick spiral within, a short span of time. When I started researching about regressive autism and potential causes, what could have happened, and I kept stumbling upon all this different types of information, things of toxic load, gut imbalance, heavy metal toxicity. And, my world kind of got turned upside down as a dietitian in that aspect. So I started doing a lot more research. I started, trying to figure out how, testing how I could help my son. And I was shocked when I started testing, like all of these things started coming back abnormal. And I'm sitting there looking at this going, oh my gosh, like, how did I not know? How did this happen? I can't believe that this actually occurs. And when you look at children now in our society, we are what we call bioaccumulating, not just heavy metals, but toxins on a higher level than we ever have before. Our society, unfortunately, is becoming more and more toxic. Our ground, our air, and our children are just absorbing that all in, and they sometimes can't detox them or get rid of those toxins the same way that they accumulate. So bioaccumulation is they are actually accumulating the toxins quicker than they can actually expel them. And you get what we call this toxic load or toxic burden on children and on adults. And with children, it can come about with any type of disorder, ADHD, autism, skin issues, eczema, poor focus, frustration, aggression. For kids, it's a little bit more like in your face. And for adults, unfortunately, when we tip that balance, we then get leaky gut more, and it comes out in other things, autoimmune disease, and our health just kind of spirals down. So with, bioaccumulation and heavy metals, it was just something that I found so fascinating. Like the information is still, coming out there, but realizing these kids and these adults are having high levels of all different types of heavy metals and toxins in their system, and they can't figure out how to get rid of them or what to do to get rid of them is kind of where I started my primary focus of, working with adults and kids, in this particular area.
Wow. Well, I mean, it's incredible. It's to see, I can't even imagine as a mother what that was like to go through that experience, and how motivating it could be to just try to figure that out and gain knowledge so that you could take control, because I know this is definitely not something that is recognized in the mainstream healthcare.
Yeah, it wasn't talked about when I was seeing, top neurologists, pediatric, developmental, doctors and stuff, and I would show them his lab reports, and they would just kind of like roll their eyes and just look at me like, man, like, we don't really understand that stuff. So, and I'm just kind of going, but the research is there. We have the research. It's not like there's no studies. It's not like there's nobody looking into this. There is research, and I'm literally handing them stacks. I walk in with my folder and I hand them, and they just like look at me and they're like, just put your child on fish oils. And I'm like, okay, well, that only solves part of the problem. But, I just kind of felt as a parent and as the clinician, like, you're supposed to be the top experts. If I'm bringing this information to you and you're not even acknowledging it, then we have a bigger problem, because it's not, like I said, it's not like this research isn't here. It's there. I've researched it. I've read the information. Kids with autism have higher rates of heavy metals than neurotypical kids. They've done research studies where they've looked at cadaver brains from people with autism from age 8 to 40 and found the highest amounts of aluminum pooled in areas of the brain. We have this research and data, and they just aren't really looking into it or knowing what to do with that information.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's great to have people like you in the world who are, standing up and fighting and researching and, helping people, because without those types of people, then we might not see any progression. And it is unfortunate. You hear people all the time. I definitely do. I went to the top doctors and in the MGH in Boston and where I'm from, and it's like that doesn't necessarily mean anything to me. They're incredible at what they do, I'm sure, but there's never a time to say that is okay. That's where we stop. We get the feedback from those types of people, and that's where we settle for we just don't know, or there's nothing else that we can do.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate that and I think that's kind of what motivates me is like, there's only a few people in the space that are really diving in and honing in on this particular area. And it's like, okay, well, we need more people to talk about it and to make it present so that people can find the information that they need.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm glad you're here today. I really appreciate you taking the time. So you mentioned, all these different issues that can be exacerbated or even maybe possibly created by this bioaccumulation of these heavy metals. Now, what are some of the most common heavy metals, and why is it so difficult to get rid of these? Or maybe we can just start with the most common heavy metals.
Yeah, so typically in my practice, I will see a few different ones. I will see lead. Lead is still a common heavy metal that is still around. Unfortunately, kids are still tested typically before they go to school to monitor lead levels. A lot of heavy metals can actually be passed from mother to baby in utero. And that's where the EWG actually found 287 different type of toxins that were actually passed on from mom to baby in the umbilical cord. So we are passing a large amount of toxin load already to our children before they're even coming out and they're born. So that's where a lot of that starts, and then it just kind of continues in what I call a snowball effect. So lead is still, unfortunately, one of them. It's still in paints and pesticides, burning of coal and gas, some plumbing. So we still do have a little bit of a lead issue for some kids, of course, and that can still cause a lot of issues. Arsenic is a pretty big one too. A lot of that I see in the water supply. Depending on where the child is located, we'll run a heavy metal test, and sometimes we'll double check their ewg.org, which is a great website that people can go to actually see what type of potential contaminants and heavy metals are in their water that they might be drinking. So that one, again, is water supply, also seafood, herbicides. Shockingly, chicken. The FDA actually only banned this in 2015, where farmers were actually feeding their chickens arsenic in their food because it actually agitated their stomach to eat more. So then they were getting fatter. So that was a big, I
said, oh, geez.
I know. So if you went to KFC and got a bucket of chicken, you were basically eating a bucket of arsenic, so that was a big issue for a long period of time. So that only actually just stopped in 2015, but it's still probably a common practice in other, I'm not sure if everyone's going to be following it, but so chicken, I always say, grass-fed, anything grass-fed is what you want. You don't want them eating pellets of feed. Typically aluminum, I will see a lot of the times as well. Aluminum is, everywhere. We cook in aluminum pots and pans, and it's our water. It's in our tinfoil cans, food and stuff like that. So I do see a lot of aluminum a lot of the times, typically in kids as well. What I've been seeing lately too is mercury. I see that a lot. That's in, obviously in fish, but also amalgam fillings. Many times when I work with parents, I'll ask if mom has amalgam fillings, because a lot of the times that's, it leaches, and there's a certain amount that actually leaches in every single day from mom into her own body, let alone, going to kids. So mercury is one of those too, if we're eating a lot of fish as well. And one of the newest ones I've been seeing is tellurium, which was really odd for me because, I've been doing heavy metal testing on kids for quite some time. And, that was not one that was coming up. And then most recently in the past year, that one's been coming up more and more. That one's related to thermal imaging and infrared sensors. So if kids are getting their temperature checked and stuff, those are what they're using. So, in kids, we absorb, with heavy metals, we absorb them in 3 ways, either ingestion, absorption through skin, or inhalation. So with kids, because, they can't excrete things as much as they're, absorbing them, that is one that's actually been coming up positive on a lot of my kids lately as well.
Now, with arsenic, I had read some research on, the levels in like brown rice due to some of the farming practices. Is that something that you've seen in practice?
Yeah. So, there was that whole big scare of like, arsenic in baby food and things like that. It's not just baby food. Unfortunately, it's most of our food. Our soil is just contaminated. Mm-hmm. So if you think about it in practice, if they're taking whole foods, potatoes or whatever, sweet potatoes to make baby food, and it's coming from the ground and that has arsenic in it, then the sweet potato that you're eating is going to have arsenic as well, because it's absorbing it from that particular ground. So same with rice. Most rice in the United States will have contamination of heavy metals. So honestly, typically I suggest people usually get like basmati rice or something that's not from the United States, because our soil is just really contaminated.
Okay. Any other metals that you would say? So you said mercury, lead, arsenic, aluminum. Any others that you would add to that list?
Cadmium, I have seen cadmium. That's a lot of the times from pesticides and fertilizers too, have that in there too. Welding, any type of heavy metals like like things like welding or building structures, cigarette smokes, batteries. So cadmium has been one that I've seen a lot, and antimony, that shockingly is on a lot of flame retardant pajamas for kids. I actually was in Target, and my oldest loves Sonic the Hedgehog. So I picked up this pajama set and I was like, oh, look. And then I was like reading the label to see like what size, and it said like flame retardant. And I was like, and we're putting that back on the shelf. Because,
oh my gosh.
So unfortunately, again, kids, they're sleeping in their pajamas or if you're my kid, you're probably in your pajama 20 hours out of the day. So, I make sure that, whatever they're, is not flame retardant pajamas or, so that's another one too.
Yeah. Wow. So for mercury, you mentioned eating a lot of fish. Now, so for this recommendation, the bigger fish, like the swordfish, tuna, like larger fish, like king mackerel, are those ones that you would recommend just kind of consuming in very much moderation?
So, yeah, I mean, I get asked this a lot, and it's really, the big fish, like tuna and things like that are out in the ocean are going to be the ones that have higher amounts of mercury in them. I try to, because we still need fish. I mean, fish is a really beneficial food for us. So I usually say if you can, at least consume salmon, that would be the better of the ones. I would avoid tuna. Tuna is the one that has the highest amount of mercury in it. So, but if we could kind of, stick to, you know,
Sardines, anyone?
yeah,
I like
sardines,
sardines. No,
salmon.
not everyone's favorite though.
I like sardines. Sardines do not like me, unfortunately. I used to eat them all the time as a kid, and then I used to get really, really sick right after I ate them. So I unfortunately can't eat sardines. I do, I mean, I grew up eating tuna too. I mean, my dad's a huge tuna fan. Like that was like, and he grew up in the 50s and the 60s when tuna was a big thing. But tuna also comes in a tin can, and now it comes in packages. So I typically say salmon. I love fish. It's really hard for me to give up fish, so I usually just say at least salmon. You want things that are not farm raised and things like that. So as long as you could do like an organic mercury, but things like tuna and stuff, I would kind of stay away from, even though it is really beneficial. As long as you have really good detoxification pathways, then it's one of those things that it's so hard because it has so many great benefits. And I hate telling parents, like, don't feed your kid tuna or salmon, even though it has amazing benefits because of the contamination. But you can limit it. You can once a week, and have a really good balance. For that.
Yeah, that's great advice. Because there was I talked to a lot of clients about eating omega-3s, and then this documentary comes out about Seaspiracy, and there's this concern of plastics and seafood, and it's like it all comes back down to that concept of balance. Like, don't consume canned tuna every single day. That shouldn't be your lunch every single day, but how can you balance it out with other fish? I love that. So why do we have such a difficult time getting rid of these things? I mean, they're sometimes, you said, naturally occurring in soil. They're in industrial things or in our water. So we're always exposed to them. We've always been exposed to them. We understand that, but so why is it becoming such an issue now, and why are we having such a hard time getting rid of them?
So that's $1 million question for some. For some, it has to do with our poor detoxification pathway. I know people have heard about MTHFR, and things like that, and poor methylation, poor detoxification pathways. And it is a real thing. I work with a lot of kids who come back who have really bad detoxification pathways, and they just cannot get rid of the heavy metal. I mean, my son is one of them. If I tried a new supplement with him, he would maybe start stimming and vocal stimming and clapping. And, you could tell it just would like go really high because his body can't metabolize and utilize the supplement like it's supposed to. So some people with MTHFR and comp mutation, and there's, it's not just one specific mutation. MTHFR is one of them. It's not the end all be all. There are other factors that play along in it too, because, my husband and I have similar genetics when it comes to MTHFR, but then I also have other issues with like comp mutation, my glutathione, SNPs and things like that. And I have a really hard time with medications, and I have a hard time detoxing. And my husband is somewhat similar in some of his SNPs, except for a few of them, and he's perfectly fine. And he can take whatever, he never gets sick, so we really do, our, whole body, we have to look at it as a whole. So is your gut working? Is your liver working? Is, your detox pathways clear? Are you able to methylate correctly? And all those things come into play with kids right now. What I'm seeing is this huge imbalance, and it stems, unfortunately, from birth, and I hate saying this because it sounds negative, but it's, C-sections versus vaginal births and breastfeeding versus formula feeding. That is like your kid's huge role in creating their microbiome. So once you start throwing off or not providing the child with the right tools for the microbiome, it throws off the rest of the system moving forward. And then they could have this issue with detoxification, because we need that whole balance to kind of work in our favor. Our diet, our Western diet is the worst for, we eat fast food and boxed foods, and, that sets your child up even further, to having a difficult time with getting good nutrition and having the body work the way you want it to. So unfortunately, until we look at that big picture from start to finish and get the body into the homeostasis where it's working really, really great, we're just going to keep accumulating these toxins because our body's just not working the way we want them to.
I love that you highlighted the point about not just, I think people can get very hyper fixated on like a genetic result or something, but as you said, like detoxification is a multi-step process, or just it's a holistic process. There's different areas to focus on. You mentioned the gut, you mentioned genetic, you mentioned upregulating of certain cellular processes like glutathione, detoxification with that. So, I mean, in terms of like treatment of this, I mean, where would someone start? Because I think someone might listen to this episode and think, oh, I just need to go on a detox. And that can be incredibly misleading, harmful, and, ineffective. So what would you like, how would you respond to someone who would say that? Like, how do we get rid of these?
So detox is actually a real medical term. I mean, if you accidentally overdose on medication, you go to the hospital, they pump you full of our activated charcoal and pump your stomach as a detox, so it is a legit term. If kids have lead poisoning, they go and they get a script from their doctor to detox the heavy metals out of their system. So detox isn't really it shouldn't scare you. I mean, if it's something like someone's going to come to you and be like, I'm going to put you on a 15-day juice cleanse detox. Yes, run, because that's just not how this works. That's kind of what our society has taken and turned, and detox, the real concept of detox into a not a negative thing. But detox is, and heavy metals, you have to understand one of the things is heavy, people come to me and they're like, I have heavy metals, I need to detox. And I say, okay, what heavy metals do you have? And they're like, I don't know. Or they give me a list. I'm like, okay, well, each heavy metal detox is a little different than the other. So we have to actually you have to test. The first step is, okay, let's test. Let's see what heavy metals you have in your system or possibly have in your system. Not one heavy metal test is going to be the most accurate. Unfortunately, there's no percentage of accuracy for heavy metals. There's hair test analysis, there's blood, and then there's urine collection. So heavy metals hide. They are not typically free floating in the system. Very rarely do I see and catch things that are unprovoked in a test, just because of the fact that they're embedded. Like I said, with that study, they found aluminum pooled in areas of the brain because it's sitting in there and it's hiding in the brain. It's hiding in your muscles. It's hiding in your tissues and your fat cells. It's not going to be free floating. Some, you will catch, lead is a better test for pulling blood than you would in a, urine test or, so you can sometimes I'll use two tests. I'll do, either maybe a hair, I'll maybe do urine, or maybe urine and blood. So it honestly just really, really depends on, the person and what we're trying to catch. So we'll try to see what heavy metals you're contaminated with, but the first step, and that's the hard part, is you could have heavy metals and you could come to me and you're like, I need to detox heavy metals. And I go, okay, what does your gut look like? And they'll be like, but I need to detox heavy metals. And I say, that's great. But if you have leaky gut, if you have a low, rich environment of commensal species in your gut, we can't detox heavy metals. It's just going to recirculate. It's not going to actually rid you of the issue that you have, because we need to start with the gut. We need to start with the liver. We need to get your body working properly to start the process naturally. And then we can kind of support and give you that, cushion to detox the rest of the heavy metals after we have the gut working, the liver working, your kidneys are functioning correctly, and your whole body, you're just feeling better. Because if you're detoxing and you feel like crap, then it's only going to make you worse. It's not going to make you feel better, especially if you have poor pathways.
Yeah, I see this a lot in terms of like the stool testing that I do, and someone will say, "Oh, I have a parasite," and they'll say, "Okay, let's kill it off." And you know, we look at their immune function and we look at the richness of their gut bacteria, and I said, "No, we're going to spend at least 3 to 6 months building you up before we kill that off, because you know it's building your body to the point where it's strong enough to do that." And I think that's a really important thing to recognize, is that you just don't go in and treat something that comes up that's flagged or negative or positive. You have to support the system before you do that, or else, you know, what can happen, and this you'll have to confirm this, but what, you know, things like you liberate these toxins, and then what you can just end up storing them back in your fat cells, or just recirculating them back in the body, where they're just going to continue to accumulate.
Right. Yeah, chelating heavy metals is not easy. A lot of the misinformation is that when you chelate heavy metals, that they won't recirculate into the system. And unfortunately, that can happen if it's not done correctly and your body's not working and doing what it needs to do. You know, again, when we talk about our microbiome had like specific commensal, you know, like lactobacillus and bifidobacteria actually help neutralize heavy metals. They actually help absorb some of their toxic elements and actually make them less toxic to the human body, because that's what they do. That's what our gut is supposed to help us and fight for us and do what it needs to do. And if it's not in a state where it can do that, if you don't have a rich environment of specific commensal microorganisms, it's not going to function. So we need to make sure that the gut is in a prime state. You don't have leaky gut, you don't have inflammation, you don't have pathogens, because unfortunately, parasites, pathogens, they love heavy metals. They feed on heavy metals. It actually gives them energy. So you know, we don't want to feed them any more than we already are. So that's another thing as well. We have to make sure that we are in a good state to start detoxing heavy metals. We have to walk before we run. And I say it's a process, and I know it could be really frustrating and really annoying sometimes to have to wait 6 to 9 months before we actually tackle heavy metals. But shockingly, once I start just with the basics, just with, you know, getting the gut working, getting the micronutrients and macronutrients on point, supporting the system, and, you know, decreasing oxidative stress, increasing their glutathione, we will retest in 6 to 9 months, and you will see that a lot of the times their heavy metals have already started to go down. It might not be a drastic change, but you could see that the body's like, okay, I got this now. Like I can start, you know, and then now we can support to get the rest of the heavy metals out. And then you can see the body really take off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point, right? Because a lot of people, especially on social media, will say, "Oh, if you have a liver and a kidney, then you're detoxing." It's like, well, yes. I mean, our bodies, yes, they are detoxing every day, and if they aren't, that's obviously a medical issue. But to what efficiency is that happening? And it's important to note that. And like you said, like macronutrients, right? Protein, carbohydrates, sulfur-containing compounds. You know, those stages of detoxification that we need to support through just diet, but correct me if I'm wrong, but diet alone cannot be the cure for this heavy metal accumulation.
It's really hard to see heavy metals go down with just diet, especially with kids who aren't the greatest of eaters. You know, with adults, it might be a little bit easier to help, you know, with if you just stuff them with cilantro or, you know, things like that to naturally detox, like maybe they'll start doing that. But with kids, it's a little bit trickier. And you made a good point. You know, I hear it all the time. Oh, you have a liver, you have a gallbladder, your main detox organs. But for kids, that's really different. Your liver actually isn't fully formed till about anywhere between 18 and 21. Hence our drinking age is 21, because that's typically when our liver is fully functionable. The gallbladder is typically, from what I've gathered, and I haven't gotten like a concise, it's typically like over the age of like 4 or 5, your gallbladder is almost fully formed. But then we have people who have no gallbladders all the time. They take them out. gallbladders burst, they become infected or whatever. So I've worked with many people who actually don't have a gallbladder, which actually then inhibits them even further. So yeah, we have detoxification organ. Our liver is one of the hardest working organs that gets the most taxed so quickly and easily. So, as much as, people can say, but your liver will detox everything. Yeah, it will. It's a really great vital organ that we need, but you need to be kind to it. And many times we are not kind to our liver. So that's a problem when it comes to trying to detox, have anything, heavy metals, toxins, environmental toxins, mold. We have to be nice to our liver.
Yeah, I think of it like, this is so random, but I think of it like a CEO of a company or something, right? Like the CEO of the company, he can do all these things and like he can get it done eventually. But if you put all the work on him without any support, right, it's going to be very difficult to get all those things done, and likely they won't get done. So thinking about it from just a kind of common sense standpoint, right, of, there's a lot going through this organ and we need to give it some extra attention sometimes.
Yeah, our liver is the main organ to help with making toxins less toxic. So it metabolizes toxins to make it so that we can detox them properly and efficiently so that they don't harm us. So sometimes when our Western diet, unfortunately, is just not in our favor for our gut and liver health at all, so that's part of the problem of why we're seeing so much more taxation on the gut. We have more people with leaky gut, more people with issues, autoimmune issues, just everything, is just diving down where, more and more people are coming to us because they're sick and they're not getting help from mainstream medicine, I want to say, because they just don't know what to do. They don't see this part of, the back end, where we can say, okay, let's go back to the beginning. And that's where we kind of have to do. And I've met practitioners who will attack heavy metals first. And that, again, that's your prerogative to do it that way, but it doesn't necessarily fix the problem long term. And then you can create more of a problem if you're still not going back to basics and fixing the rest of the system first. It's like, it's like fixing a broken car. The car needs an engine, but you're just kind of changing some of like the battery real quick, but you still need an engine, but you're just changing the battery to make it last a little bit longer.
Yeah, I think that can be very frustrating for some of my clients, because they'll come to me and they'll be like, I could have Googled some of these things, to eat more protein, to drink more water. And I said, yeah, but you're not doing any of them. And that's the harsh reality, right? Is like, I am just as compassionate to the next person about, especially when it comes to health issues. I've struggled through my own, but if you're not doing the basics, like you cannot expect yourself to go and address the red flags here. Like that's just not something you can do. And so I'd love to talk about some dietary strategies. Like you mentioned certain chelators like cilantro, which I love. I like make salads out of cilantro, and they're really delicious. But I mean, what are some foods that, just thinking of somebody who maybe hasn't gotten to the level of like neurological issues or, thyroid issues, or certain things that can come from, high levels of exposure of heavy metals, but someone who's just average, everyday human wanting to kind of maximize this detoxification process and have some natural dietary things to have.
Yeah. So again, like I said, our Western diet isn't, the nicest and kindest to us. And one of the things that we miss that many other countries don't is our herbs and our flavors. We it's really funny, in the space that I work, particularly with kids, parents, literally what they give their kids is chicken nuggets, pizza, French fries, crackers, just those bland foods. And I say, okay, what does your kid eat that might have a spice? Oh, my kid loves Cool Ranch Doritos. Your kid likes spice. Like, sometimes we completely miss that people have sophisticated palates, and especially kids. If you never give your kid any type of herbs or spices in something that you cook, then they don't understand what it is. But once they find something that they like, it's like, ooh, you know, that's amazing. So I'm like, if your kid will eat Cool Ranch Doritos, you need to start making something and adding in any type of garlic, ginger, and onion. Boom. Just simple. But those are some of your highest antioxidant propertied foods that we completely miss from our diet a lot of the times. I am not the biggest fan of onions. I am not the biggest fan of garlic, but I know that I do have to add them in something that I'm cooking, even if it's just for some flavor, but because I know that that property, that what they have is so beneficial to my health. And, you know, if you look at other countries that use things like curry and, you know, all those really flavorful herbs and spices and stuff, they tend to have a lot better health status than, you know, us, because we miss that. You know, unfortunately, home cooking isn't a thing anymore. A lot of the times it's hard. It's a quick thing, but you can still get a lot of those sulfur containing compounds, anything with sulforaphane in it, broccoli sprouts, you know, those types of things. So, you know, getting, you know, flooding the system with a lot of those herbs, the onions, the garlic, you know, that's key, to just start somewhere, because that's gonna help your microbiome. It's gonna help against any type of specific gut pathogens that you can actually kind of keep in check with those particular herbs and spices as well. Green tea is one of my favorite things, whether it just be, you know, a little, you know, a tea bag and some water, you know, even for your kids, it's a great antioxidant. It has great antioxidant properties. It supports the liver. And basically, essentially what you're trying to do with these types of food is support the microbiome and support the liver. And that's kind of where it starts. And then you can kind of work your way into other things if you wanted to do like ginseng or licorice, or, you know, other types of, you know, royal jelly, if you wanted to go, you know, that route into other types of dietary supplements, you can, you know, but I don't suggest them until you start just getting your diet under control, you know, kind of trying to hit what I always try to explain to patients is to try to hit 40 different whole foods a week. Different types of fruits and vegetables, because that's really the only way you're going to start really balancing your microbiome, is to hitting 40 whole foods of fruits, vegetables, grains, and stuff like that per week. That is important for your whole entire system.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really fun for me is, you know, I have clients, even if they're picky eaters, and I work with mostly adults, you know, we're kind of coming up with, okay, so what do you like, what is your time frame this week in terms of meal prep? Like, what do you have time to cook? And then I get to put together like a few different recipe ideas for them. And every single week I'm picking like a different new vegetable or a different new spice and incorporating, and they don't even necessarily know what I'm doing. I'm just kind of saying like, you know, this might look good. You might like this. It takes 5 minutes to make. And they try it and they're like, you know, most of the time, hey, that's not too bad. And getting some variety in and what that can offer for gut health is so important. And fermented vegetables, you know, things like that, of throwing some, you know, pickled carrots on top of like a taco or something, and you know, or getting fermented pickles and enjoying those on a sandwich or something. Those are all good ways to support, you know, natural gut detoxification. I love how you mentioned garlic and onion. I think a lot of people, you know, the low FODMAP diet can be a big challenge for some people. And that's why I don't often use a very strict low FODMAP diet. And obviously addressing root causes of digestive issues is important. But I see people who have been following those low FODMAP diets for like 3 to 5 years, which it's only meant to be a short-term diet. And then you're missing out on all these amazing prebiotics and herbs and spices that could be assisting your body to naturally, you know, do what it needs to do. So I work with a lot of people to help their bodies come back from those things as well. So that's,
I can usually tell when someone's been on a FODMAP diet when I do their gut test.
yes, very, very low good bacteria.
Even that, or keto, paleo. I mean, I can tell. I can look at their microbiome and go, what diet are you following? A keto diet or a paleo diet or low FODMAP? And they'll be like, yeah, I have been. I'm like, okay, this is the problem now. You created a problem. We cannot remove whole food groups. It's our whole microbiome, different components are, are needing these specific food groups, fats, proteins, carbs, fruits, vegetables. We once you eliminate a whole food group, you damage one part of the microbiome. And people don't realize that. I know you probably feel better, not eating carbs, but there are other carbs that you could eat that you don't probably are aware of that are really, like, for instance, your short chain fatty acids. When you eat no carbs, no starches, you decrease your short chain fatty acids.
And short chain fatty acids reduce inflammation in your GI tract and help to prevent you from getting leaky gut. So this is huge. And I think I wouldn't call myself anti any specific diet, because I meet clients where they are, but I definitely have an anti-diet approach. I don't see it benefiting anyone's gut microbiome for the long term, unless it's because they haven't addressed an underlying root cause like SIBO or something, where yes, it's kind of like your car example, like you're maybe changing the battery by following that diet, but you're not actually fixing the engine.
Yeah. And again, I'm not, with kids with autism, they're typically on some type of diet. They're either gluten-free, dairy-free, soy-free, corn-free. I mean, and this is just for inflammation and brain function, that they have to be on these particular diets, and that's perfectly fine. But I work with them to make sure that when we remove those whole food groups, they're getting other supplements from other areas so that it's not impacting the microbiome.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I will also kind of second that, is that there are people that I work with who do have to follow gluten-free, dairy-free, soy-free diet, not maybe all the above, some people maybe, but that doesn't mean that you go low carb or you go keto. There's certain ways around that. And so I'm glad you highlighted that. So you talked about the testing, you talked about the hair, the urine, the red blood cell, it's kind of individualized there. We talked about kind of how to detox. So is there anything else that you would add that people should know? I mean, I know fasting has become a really popular thing. And I think there's this concept of upregulating cellular processes and autophagy and things like that. What are your thoughts on fasting? And feel free to.
I'm not the biggest fan of intermittent fasting. I've read some of the research out there when it comes to the research is most of the research, I should say, is with significantly obese people who, when they do intermittent fasting, they're essentially just cutting their calories. That's, part of it as well. I have other dietitians, I'm not a weight loss dietitian. I don't like anything that has to do with weight loss. I have trouble with myself, because I just never had that passion for it. I liked other types of, the nutrition stuff when it comes to stuff like this and how, nutrition helps the body detox. But, with intermittent fasting, I have seen it work for some people, and they say they feel better, they do great. And listen, by all means, there's so many different diets out there, and I think, depending on that person, if that diet works for you, fantastic. As long as you're still eating and, getting the proper nutrition, by all means. But I have an issue when people just start removing whole food groups, without knowing what they're really doing. And that's why they invented us, and I'm glad that we're dietitians. I'm glad that, we understand this component of it so we can help people. But I think we're underutilized a lot of times, where people are just jumping on the bandwagon to diets. They're like, oh my gosh, it works. And then all of a sudden something breaks down and something doesn't work anymore. And now we have an issue because that diet didn't, work. It only worked for a certain amount of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. I definitely can agree on the side of, I have never been passionate about weight loss. It's not something that, I think there's so much more to it, and focusing on how you feel, right? How's your gut? How's your mental health? How's your energy levels? Things like that are so much more important. And I think they don't get enough attention compared to weight change. So, I mean, in terms of advice for people if they're looking for maybe like 3 takeaways? Are there 3 main takeaways that you would give the listener for optimizing their detoxification pathways? I don't think we really talked about like emotional or physical stress, but I mean, I know that those can also play a role into it, but any advice there?
Yeah. So, I mean, when I work with kids, I have to remind parents that kids are just under as much stress as you are as an adult, us as adults, we are business owners, we work full time, we have a family to feed, we might not be sleeping great. Like, all those things that affect us as adults actually affect children as well. And we kind of miss that component. We have to de-stress. And we are just living in a society of just high stress, and that's not working for anyone's microbiome right now at all, either. So my thing right now is, if you think heavy metals are affecting you, and it really could be. I mean, I've worked with people with hormone issues, PCOS and stuff like that. They have heavy metal detox load. Kids with autism, ADHD, detox load. People with early onset Alzheimer's, dementia, toxic load, heavy metals. So if you think heavy metals could be a problem, it really could be. You can start with testing, but if you're going to test, also test your microbiome. Yeah. And start there, because we cannot detox without getting the body prepped and ready and in a good state first. And then we can tackle everything else down the road. So you can 100% test and see where you're at and see what, how you're doing. That's a great, just so and you can put your mind at ease and go, okay, yes, I do have high amounts of aluminum. And you can start making those dietary changes, maybe not using aluminum foil, not avoiding cans and, anything that comes from a can, whatever it could be, mercury, maybe it's your amalgam fillings and you want to get them removed, decreasing your amount of fish. So you could definitely test to see where you're at, so you can see what your avoidance areas, because you definitely want to avoid bioaccumulating any more of those heavy metals than you already have. Also test your gut. Let's see where your gut is, and let's see how we can get your gut to a really good spot so that we can start detoxing down the road and start putting into some of these interventions. Maybe you need DMSA or ALA or, any zeolites or cilantro. We can add those things in at any point in time when we feel that you're ready to, and your detoxification pathways are open. So you could definitely test to just see where you're at, but definitely throw in a gut test too, to see where you're at too.
That's great advice. Thank you for that. This was incredibly informative, and I hope the listeners have taken away some really good messages out of here. I know that I've even learned a lot from you. So thank you for being in this field and for doing what you do. And it's incredible to hear your passion about how you got into this and what motivates you, because I think it's just nice to hear those stories, and it makes I'm sure people listening could probably relate or pass this episode on to someone who could relate. And that will help somebody for sure. So most important question of the episode is, what is your favorite childhood memory with food?
Oh my gosh. So my mom grew up in Ticonderoga, Lake George. And we used to spend our summers there every year since I was a kid that I could remember. There is, I think it's still there, is an ice cream place that when you order a large ice cream, it was in a cone, and it literally was about 3 feet tall. And I remember, playing my mom knew about it. No one else knew about it. So she ordered a large and came out holding it for my dad. And it literally was like the size of my arm, when I was a kid. And I'll never forget my dad, looking at it going, we have to eat all this. But it was just it was a fun, that to me was one of the best memories that I can remember. Cause I remember being a kid and you just see this big, tall thing of ice cream. You couldn't believe how it's actually on the holding into the cone and how tall it was. But that was what they were known for back then.
That's so fun. We actually had an ice cream place just like that. It was I think it was Kimball Farm or something, and the portion sizes were unreal. And like, you remember being a kid and your mom would be like, okay, only 3 scoops of ice cream. You're like, you go there and you're like, oh, I'll get a kitty size. And they're like, oh, we'll give you a kitty size. Like, and you're just so excited, right? It's, that's awesome. I love that memory.
Yeah, I remember like getting like if you got like a kid small, it was like a large ice cream cone. It was just like ridiculous, like crazy. And I just remember being a kid going, this is great.
That's awesome. Well, I love that. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. Where can people find you if they want to work with you or just learn more? Do you have like a website where people could check out your information?
Yeah. So I have an Instagram, Facebook, and website. It's biomedicalhealingforkids.com. And then you can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Biomedical Healing for Kids. I post a lot of great content, and I try to be very active in my Facebook group. I have almost 4,000 people in my Facebook group that I connect with. So you can always ask questions. You can always PM me privately. And I'm constantly just posting, having, I do free lectures and things like that too. So I'm always trying to be active and giving back as much as I can.
That's amazing. Wow. Well, thank you for the work that you're doing. And I'll be sure to link all your resources in the show notes. And I'll also be sure to share your information that you share on social media platforms so that it can get out to more people who need it.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Talk to you later, Greer.